Welcome to this week's episode of Being Human. I'm here with Christian Espinosa. He is the author of The Smartest Person in the Room, The Root, Cause and Solution for Cybersecurity. He's also the CEO of Alpine Security. Christian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Richard. Glad to be here.
Now, just right off the bat, there might be people thinking, well, this podcast is called Being Human and we're talking about cybersecurity. But this is a very human story. Do you just want to sort of paint in broad strokes what this book is about, Christian?
Yeah, sure. The book it's about why we're losing the cybersecurity war from my perspective. There's a lot of emphasis on technological solutions, new firewalls, artificial intelligence, and processes and frameworks. But the bottom line is, and the root issue of the problem are the people in the industry. The highly technical people, which tend to lean towards a certain personality type, where there's a belief that if you have like a high IQ, it's okay if you have no EQ or a very low EQ or basically no, people skills. So that inhibits our ability to collaborate, to communicate, and ultimately perform better and defend our networks better.
Right. Yeah. So this is a people story in terms of how do we defend our IT, our infrastructure, our data in a better way.
Exactly.
And you say losing the war. So when you say losing the war, so what your perspective right now is that the cyber criminals are winning? I suppose my sense is they're kind of being kept at bay for the most part, but you think we're losing?
Yeah, I think cyber criminals are totally winning. Every day, if you hear on the news, there's a new breach, a new data breach, and just when we think there can't be a bigger one, there can't be more records stolen or more information stolen, there's another one that comes out. Like a month ago or 3 weeks ago, SolarWinds breach came out. That was a massive breach. So it's always something coming out, and tomorrow there'll probably be something bigger. So that to me is a pretty big indicator that we're not doing well defending our networks and keeping the criminals at bay.
Right. And I think people may have heard a sort of passing reference to this SolarWinds thing. Yeah, can you just fill people in on what happened there and why it's such a big deal?
Yeah, so the SolarWinds attack was a supply chain attack, basically. And the biggest impact of the SolarWinds attack is a lot of organizations use SolarWinds to monitor the health of their environments, to monitor the systems on their environment. And this included like Department of Defense organizations in the United States and government organizations. And what happened with the attack is the SolarWinds software went out to do an update. So normally software updates itself periodically, like Windows update. And the idea is the update is going to, patch the software, fix problems, and make it more secure. But when this update occurred, it actually updated the software with some malicious code. So when I say a supply chain attack, this update infrastructure is what was compromised, which is a very eye-opening thing, because we tend to believe like, if I'm going to go to my Windows update and patch my system, that's a trusted entity I'm going to. But if that's compromised, then my quote update to patch the system is actually installing malicious software. And that's basically what happened. And because SolarWinds is deployed so globally across many industries and many government organizations, it was a big deal.
Right. And what was the ultimate? So this attack happened. What were the breaches? What was the impact ultimately?
The impact, it depended on when it was caught. Like we had several clients that were affected by the SolarWinds breach, and we were able to contain that. But what happened if we weren't able to contain it is the attack could basically spread on your internal network and compromise most of your systems at an administrator level. So when that happens, the attacker can pretty much steal all your data. They can steal your passwords, basically wreak havoc on your environment and do whatever they wanted to.
Right. So it was they got well and truly inside the castle walls.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And what was your take on the you know, on the election piece, right, with the Dominion, is that something you've looked into? Because I know generally that's been dismissed, but I've seen some people say, well, you know, perhaps there were some compromises. Is that something you've looked at? Or?
I did read some papers on and some of the penetration tests or ethical hacking reports on the Dominion system, and all I can say is that I didn't test it myself or have my organization test it, but any system like that is highly prone to being attacked. If it has a USB port, if it has a connection to the internet, it's highly likely that that system was compromised in some capacity. Now, do I know the extent of the compromise and if it affected the elections? I'm not sure, but I'm sure there were some compromises. Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it feels like it's a high risk strategy to have all this data out there to any degree, right? I mean, computerized at all, right? It's interesting. I know some European governments have just completely, dismissed the idea of having any kind of electronic form of counting or voting.
Yeah, that's one way to make it secure. Anything that's considered critical, the minute you touch it, connect it to the internet or connect it to something else, or allow people to put a thumb drive into it, it's going to compromise the integrity of that system.
Right. Well, okay. So that feels like I've sated my curiosity around the cyber piece of this, but I'm sure we'll circle back to it, but let's dive into this story. So the smartest person in the room, who does that refer to?
That refers to most people in cybersecurity that are highly technical. They want to be the smartest person in the room, and that's really what gives them significance is being smarter than other people, and that ultimately results in intellectual bullying and posturing. And the thing is, I wrote the book about a lot of people I've encountered, but the smartest person in the room used to be me, 10 years ago or whatever. I was the one that, was significant because I was, quote, smarter than everybody. So I would look for things to agree with rather like listening for insight. And that really got to a point where it inhibited my career. And I think that is a sort of an epidemic, really, in our highly technical career fields, because that's the thing that makes you significant is your intellect. And when that's challenged, that causes issues.
Right. And when was what was that process for you in terms of the realization that this was an issue for you?
I think the process was when I started my company in 2014. I founded Alpine Security. I hired people. I had to train people, and I started seeing a lot of problems with my personnel. A lot of talking over clients' heads because they wanted to show that they're smarter than the client, talking over each other's heads internally, not playing well together. And that made me realize if I want to make an impact in cybersecurity with my organization, I need to shift this culture. And I had accepted it for a couple of years, this is just the way it is. But I realized there's got to be a different way, because I had one of my technical engineers was telling me the results of a debrief to a client, and he told me that the client just didn't get it. And that was kind of like a moment for me. I'd heard that many times throughout my career, but if the client just doesn't get it, then there's no way they can be secure. They're not going to understand the risk. They're not going to understand how to fix it. And it's our job to not, try to feel super smart and talk over the client's head. It's our job to make sure the client or the board of directors or whoever we're talking to actually gets it. If that means changing the way we communicate, that's what we need to do.
Right. And I guess when it came to seeing that your business might be on the line, it was time for you to start to really pay attention, right?
Yeah, it was different when I was working for somebody else. This is a problem, but when it's my business and I funded the business and I could potentially lose everything, the necessity was much higher to figure this out. Yes.
Right. And what also grabbed me in the story is leading up to the moment where you branched out to set up your own company, right? That in itself was a pivot point, it seemed like, for you.
Yeah, that was a pivot point. I was working for a company for a couple years, and I was a VP, a vice president of the company, and was making a lot of money. I had all the sort of like external measures of success, but I was having like this kind of like difference of opinion with my CEO, and it got to the point where I was like physically feeling like ill about work and about the environment. I couldn't like let it go. So I decided to quit without having another job lined up. I decided at that moment that my well-being and my health and all that was more important than any amount of money in the world. It wouldn't have mattered if they offered me, $100 million. I was certain I was leaving. And that was like a critical moment for me, a defining moment, because it was the first time my entire career that I did not have something lined up, another job. I'd quit with no plan, basically. And and I kind of mentioned this in the book. I'd craved certainty throughout my whole life because I didn't have it growing up. And this is like the first time like I had no certainty. I just had to figure things out, which I think is part of the journey. We want to have certainty on the outside, on the external world, but the reality is certainty should come from within. And that's really what began my journey of like, I can figure these things out. And after that, I started freelance work and then started my company several years later.
Right. And when you say you didn't have a lot of certainty in your childhood, I mean, that sounds like an understatement, Christian.
Well, it might be an understatement. I think, I don't know what other people's childhoods are like. I just know what mine was like.
Well, tell us a little bit about, obviously I've read the book, so I got some idea, but yeah, for the listeners.
Yeah, my childhood was very chaotic. Not a lot of certainty there. My mother was a single mother, and I had two half brothers. And we lived in California for a while, but then we moved to Arkansas. And we moved to Arkansas, it's when like things started kind of going downhill as far as my mother was addicted to pain medications, prescription pain meds. And that addiction just got kind of worse over time. And that meant like it wasn't just that, there's weird people over at my house all the time. We lived in a trailer, very poor, on welfare, food stamps, WIC, which is where you get like a big block of government cheese and stuff like that. So there's always like car accidents, violence and just loud music and people like, I had a bedroom in my trailer, for instance. People that my mom would have over would break into I put a lock on my door. They'd break into my bedroom and steal my stuff. So it was really very chaotic, and I didn't like the environment at all, really.
Right. And I said to this before we came on, that I'm just astounding. Not only, just the fact that you're not like a drug addict or like a complete, sort of mess in a sense, right? That, I mean, it's extraordinary to me that you could grow up in that environment and become as successful as you are. How do you account for that, right? Because presumably a lot of the people you grew up with have not gone on to found cybersecurity companies and become successful authors.
For me, I knew something about that environment it didn't feel right. I always, from the time I was very young, I gathered a lot of like energy or peace from like the outdoors, from like being in nature. So like when things were very chaotic, I'd go in nature. So I think, that maybe helped ground me some. But really, I knew, witnessing like the scenario with my mom and her friends, there was a lot of like partying and the drug stuff and all that. But ultimately, if you like just looked at the scenario, they weren't happy. This is just like an outlet, short-term thing to try to like be happy. But ultimately, my mother wasn't happy. She wasn't fulfilled. Her friends weren't happy. They weren't fulfilled. And I thought, there's got to be something more to life than this, because this does not look like a happy existence or a fulfilling existence. And when I, started thinking about it from that perspective, is really when I started looking at ways to get out of the environment, which meant picking different friends. I lived with my grandparents when I was a senior, so I had a little more stability, so I could focus on school and on sports and getting accepted into the Air Force Academy, which is where I ultimately went. So I looked at my circumstances as like, what can I do to set myself up for success despite this environment? Because if I end up in this environment, which is what I thought, I'm going to be living the same pattern, which it doesn't look very fulfilling.
Right. So it seems to me that you were imbued with an awful lot of wisdom at a very young age to have that perspective.
Yeah, I don't know if it's wisdom. It's probably some of that. I think we all know, if we like tune into our feelings and really sit with ourselves, I think we have a sense of what's right and what's wrong and what feels right to us. And it's also, I was very competitive. I'm still pretty competitive, but then in high school and in middle school and growing up, I was very competitive, extremely competitive. So I wanted to be the best at everything I did. That's where I got my significance. So if I played football, I wanted to be the best at football. I did play football. If in academics, I wanted to be the best in that too, and that served me because it got me a scholarship ultimately to the Air Force Academy and the other military academies. And it served me for a long time in my career, trying to be extremely competitive. I didn't like people telling me I couldn't do something, and it really. I grew up in a small town, like 5,000 people, so everybody knew my story with my mom and my brothers, and the situation was embarrassing, but it's also like, from that competitive nature, I felt like all these people have this like view of what's going to happen to me probably, and what I can't do and what I'm not going to be able to do, and I wanted to prove people wrong.
Right. That can be an enormous motivator for people, can't it? Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to defy your expectations of me.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Right. And it sounds like you channeled so much of I suppose that energy and for what was going on for you at home into that competitive drive and
I definitely channeled that, and I think also I was very frustrated with my scenario in growing up, and I played football and sports, and I think from a healthy outlet to relieve that frustration, football was definitely a good one for me, because you could run and you hit the people of the team, like it's a sort of a, not a violent sport, but there's physical sport, right? So I think having that outlet was very useful as well. I don't think a lot of people have an outlet like that, and it surfaces in other ways that are not so good for them.
Right. And then, okay, so you're highly competitive. You get the scholarship. You want to be Top Gun, right?
Yes, that's right. I watched the movie Top Gun. I wanted to be like Tom Cruise. Yeah, except for the Air Force, not the Navy.
Right, and you didn't, but you did get in, right, into the Air Force, but you didn't become Tom Cruise, or at least.
No, I didn't become Tom Cruise. I got accepted to the Air Force Academy. I applied for every scholarship I could find in every military academy. I chose the Air Force Academy. The senior year of high school, the last game, I tore like 3 of the 4 ligaments of my knee. So I lost the scholarship because I was no longer physically qualified. So I had to work like extremely hard to rehabilitate my knee. And I got qualified to go to the Air Force Academy again, and also qualified to become a pilot. But then when I graduated, they cut all the pilot slots basically. So I would have to wait to reapply, and the chances were slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. So I just decided to forget the pilot business and go into communications and electronics, which is what I did.
Right. And you got into security of networks, and that started your career. Is that right?
Yeah, I was a communications officer, and I started off, managing from an IT perspective, looking at, managing an IT systems branch, and then we also had to worry about security, obviously, because we had, we're the U.S. Air Force, and we have like classified data and stuff like that as well.
Right. And just out of interest, so how sort of active was that beat? What is the level of interest in, getting into the US military networks? Is it, are people trying constantly, or is this once in a while? I mean, give us a sense of that.
Yeah, people are trying constantly to get into the U.S. networks, especially nation-state actors, other countries, and there's been like major data breaches of U.S. and government organizations like the Office of Personnel Management. That was a major breach where basically anybody that had a clearance, there were anyone that was able to access classified information, their records were stolen, which is basically like everything about that person, their contacts, all their dirty laundry. Because if you go through a clearance process, you have to like disclose of everything you've ever done. Plus, their medical records were stolen, so everything has been stolen, and it's just a matter of time, like when this stuff is going to resurface in some sort of attack.
Right. And so and that's, you're just constantly presumably monitoring how these attacks are happening, trying to develop tools to stay one step ahead. And is that the game? Like, what's the nature of the warfare, I suppose?
Yeah, the nature of the warfare is basically the U.S. in military installations or government installations has a room where they're watching the perimeter and all the attacks come in. That people's job is to watch what's coming in and figure out how to respond to it, figure out if it's like, just an automated bot looking for vulnerability, if it's actually an attacker group trying to, carry out a specific objective. That's their job, to monitor that and figure out how to respond to it.
Right. And that's what that was your life, right? For all your time in the military.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that the yeah.
Basically, most of my time in the military was cybersecurity exercises, traveling to different installations, helping them secure their environments. Yeah, and I was a contractor for a while and worked in different agencies for the government as well.
Right. And when you say exercise, is that where you'll like simulate attacks or pay people to try and get in? I mean, how do the exercises work?
Yeah, so the exercises, we did a number of exercises, but one of the things I did was develop scenarios. In a scenario, we would come up with a scenario, like if I were an attacker, this is what I would carry out against your environment. And the idea is we would see if somebody was prepared to respond. An example would be, like this was quite a few years ago. We did an example where an attacker compromised all the cell phones in an area and and a number of computers, and called 911 from all of them. Well, the idea was if they could overwhelm the 911 system, then they could maybe carry out something else, as an example, and to see if somebody was prepared for that. Another example, this is a fairly simple one, was what if we like try to log on 3 times to everybody's account on a military installation, and there's like 10,000 accounts, and every one of them is locked out, and the organization has to have the user call them to unlock their account. Now you've got 10,000 people trying to call to get their accounts unlocked, which proved that even though this sounded like a great idea to implement this account lockout policy, it could actually be used to your detriment by an attacker.
Right. Okay. Interesting. And in terms of that work, to the extent that you could disclose it, what was your proudest moment then of your time in the services?
I think my proudest moment was some of the exercises we did. We did exercises that were sort of like multi-service. So Air Force, Navy, Army, they're joint exercises basically from a cyber perspective. And some of those were very eye-opening, and I helped develop some of the scenarios for that. So as an example, like what would happen if an Air Force base attacks a Navy institute, a naval yard, and if the Navy blocks the Air Force base, then they can't communicate. So things like that, and figuring out how to make us, more resilient and stronger to cyber attacks. I'm pretty proud of that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Now, something we've both got in common, Christian, is Landmark Forum, right? Which, for those who are not aware, familiar with it, I suppose it's a self-development program. It certainly has its detractors. It's pretty intense. Tell me how Landmark entered your life and where it fits into this story.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of personal development throughout my life. I done quite a few Tony Robbins events. I've done other things as well, John Maxwell. But I remember at this Tony Robbins event, I always like to talk to people about, what sort of shaped their life or what was a critical moment in their life. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said the Landmark Forum was one of the best things he went to. So I sort of added it to my list, right? And then when I add things to my list, sometimes I go research it, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to make it happen. So I found a date. I think I was going to Hawaii for like a vacation, and there was a class in LA. Like I thought, well, I'll go to this Landmark Forum course in LA, and then I'll go to Hawaii afterwards. So that was my plan. So I went to the course in LA, and it was like, I thought the Tony Robbins, like Unleash the Power Within, and some of the other courses like Date with Destiny were intense. The Landmark Forum was way more intense than the other ones. So intense, so much so that I realized to get the most out of these events, you're going to be uncomfortable. But I was so uncomfortable now, and I was like, you know what? I don't know if this is for me. I wanted to like leave as soon as the first break, not come back. But I stuck it out though.
Right. And when you say intense, what kind of intense?
Intense where the person leading the course was very good. Like you couldn't get much past her. Like a lot of people would challenge her if she would say something, and she was very good about putting it back on the person that was challenging them. Because ultimately in life, we tend to find things in others that is really within ourselves, right? So it's like the world is a mirror of ourselves, right? And that's what Landmark Forum.
One finger pointing out, four fingers pointing back at you, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, exactly. So it was very intense because there's a lot of intense discussions, and there's a lot of group exercises, and there's a lot of people that were, they highly encourage you to come up and share something about, your childhood or whatever that was relevant to what they were talking about. And I went up there and shared something. It was very uncomfortable for me.
And do you mind asking what you shared?
Yeah, I shared this story. So when I was in California, there was a lot of chaos there as well, and I think a lot of our things that manifest as adults come from childhood trauma or something that happened more before the age of 7, typically. So in California, my mother sent me to school on a Saturday one day. So I went, I walked to school, and there was no crossing guard there. There was used to cross, because there's always a crossing guard there. I was like in kindergarten or whatever. So I came back, but there was like this loud music playing in my house, and I just got the sense that my mom just like wanted me away from the house so she could do, whatever she wanted to do with her friends. So I ended up going to the park, and I went to the park, and I hung out the park all day. Like there's a park fairly close. And I just remember sitting there, and like there's these ducks and these geese and the wind, and that gave me solitude. So like I've always loved nature, and I've always felt like at peace with nature. And that moment, for me was difficult to talk about then, because it was almost like admitting that my mom probably thought I was a burden and a hassle. So I really wasn't, I was sort of welcome, but not really back. So that's why I spent the time at the park. But also it gave me the understanding, I guess, of why I get so much energy and solace from being in nature as well.
Right. And so it's a moment of, I'm glad it helped you make sense. Is that right?
Yeah, it did help connect a lot of things. Yeah. Mhm.
Right. And in terms of what post the forum, then did it? What shifted externally? Did anything happen?
Yeah. Ultimately, it's a landmark forum, and I highly recommend the landmark forum. Uh, you need to be committed to your personal development because it's going to be a little bit challenging. But ultimately, what the takeaway is, at least it was for me, is that life is meaningless. There is no meaning to life. Like there's no inherent meaning to life. The only meaning to things that happen to you and experiences is the one you attach to it. So like that scenario with my mother or my childhood, I can attach a meaning to that doesn't serve me, and I did for a long time of my life. I was like resentful and bitter, and I was like, I wish I had a different childhood, but the reality is that wasn't helping me at all. And the meaning of life is like whatever you make it. So why not attach something, a meaning to an event or your past that serves you? And this is what happened at the Landmark Forum as well. I shifted my my meaning of what I attached to my childhood from that resentment and wishing it was different and wishing it was stable. I shifted it to, my mother was probably doing the best she knew how to do. I think we're all doing the best we can with the resources we're given. And I also shifted from like I probably wouldn't be where I am today without my childhood, because my childhood gave me that drive. Because I was so like determined to get out of there, it sort of forced me to get better at a lot of things. So when I shifted that way, is I basically I'm grateful that my childhood was the way it was. Otherwise, if it was easier or different, I may not have turned out the way I did.
Right. So it gave you a different perspective on your childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you find that? And have you shared any of this with your mother or with your siblings?
Well, my mother basically OD'd about 10 years ago, so I never got a chance to really come full circle with her on that. And my two brothers, I haven't really talked to them about it either. One of them's been in and out of jail, and the other one I should probably make an effort to talk to more so.
Right. Yeah. No, it's yes, I did it as well, and it was I think for me I had a slightly different experience. I didn't pick up so much on that idea of making your own meaning. It was more the mirror that it held up, right?
Yeah.
It showed me who I was, and it really showed me where my dysfunctions were in a way I couldn't escape them.
It's very good at that. Yes.
Yeah. I think so. I think what you're saying about commitment is so true, right? Yeah. It's just because what's the first session is like an evening and 2 days if it's still the same format.
Yeah.
I think that's right. The Friday evening, and then it goes through to the Sunday, doesn't it? And that's going to be a pretty intense experience for most people.
Yeah, it was intense, but I'm glad I went through it.
Yeah.
Because when you realize, like you said, the mirror, that you tend to look, whatever you see in others is typically because your own model of the world, your own filter, and so it's really you reflecting back through other people. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And the story, I think I might have shared this on the show before, but it's when I turned up to because I don't know if you continued with it, but I continued to do it, where you do these volunteer sessions where you get on the phones and you call people up, right?
I didn't do that. Yeah.
Right. Which is one of the reasons they got banned in France, because you don't get paid for that. And I think France saw it as some sort of form of slave labor or something. So they got banned. That's so the story goes. So anyway, but yeah, this guy turned me away because I was hungover. Right. And I was like, me, the great Richard Atherton, hungover and can't do your shitty sales job. So it just showed up my grandiosity, the fact that I had an alcohol problem, a whole bunch of stuff was just, came to the surface from this guy just basically telling me to go home.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was, that was a big moment. But Yeah, I'd certainly recommend it for people who are, ready to be given potentially some shock treatment.
Yeah, I think it would benefit everybody. It makes you realize that we're really in charge of more than we think we are. I think too many people live their life thinking this is just the way it is and I have no choice. We always have a choice.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it starts with some form of reflection, I think, doesn't it? I mean, I think that's probably maybe common to our experiences here.
Yeah, and we have to make time for reflection, and that's something that I struggle with today, as I'm pretty busy. So I need to make sure I schedule time in my day, or at least my week, to just kind of sit back, turn off my devices, and think about where I am, where I want to go, what recurring pattern I keep living that's not serving me, and how to make that change, basically make that shift.
Right. Okay, now we've it's taken us a while, but let's get to the content of the book. We've given the backstory here. So we've got this. Is it 1, 2, 3, 4? I'm just looking at my notes. 5, 6. It is 8, right? There are 8 facets to this. I suppose method around getting to the root cause and solution for cybersecurity. So, yeah, I guess give us the perhaps the overview of this approach. Maybe we can pick up on a couple of the practices or things that are most useful for people in the realm of cybersecurity.
Yeah, so I came up with this thing I call the secure methodology, which are 7 steps.
7.
And
I was wrong. I can't
that's
count.
okay. There's 7 right now. Let me add an 8th later, but yeah, there's 7 right now, and they're in order because I think as you go through these steps, you the first one's awareness. You have to have some awareness, for instance, before you can start working on your communications. And communication is step 4. So I put them in order because it logically, from my perspective, makes sense for you to progress to them in the order I presented them. But the idea is, if you're a technical leader and you go through these steps, the awareness, the mindset, the acknowledgement. I have all these these different steps in there. If you go through these steps, it'll help you improve your leadership abilities, so you can lead your technical team better, and then you can also help train your technical team on these 7 steps as well. And you could take each step individually and try to improve in that one area. Like, one of the steps I have is monotasking, as example. In society, we've been taught to multitask, and multitasking basically it doesn't really help us at all. We like to believe that we're really busy, we multitask, but the bottom line is we're not being very productive. And then also, when we're talking to somebody, a lot of us are on our phone, we're thinking about something else, so we're not present. Which is like monotasking. For present, it enhances our ability to communicate and connect to people as well.
Right.
So the notion is you take.
Go on.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, though, the monotasking, that really rung true for me, because right now on Zoom calls, most of my life is on Zoom calls, and it's so much easier to cheat, right, on a Zoom call. You could be checking your emails or doing stuff, turn your camera off, rather you can in a physical meeting. So I've really had to up my game to stay present, or to monotask, as you say, to be like, no, I'm on this Zoom call. I'm turning every notification off. I'm just going to focus on this Zoom call and stay present. Yeah.
Yeah, that is so true. Today, it's much easier, and I find myself doing it too. I'm not perfect to these 7 steps, but I have a lot of meetings, and sometimes if the meeting is boring, I'll turn my camera off and I'll do something else, which is not monotasking. So right now I'm definitely monotasking. This is not boring, but yeah, it's something to always keep in mind. But if everybody's doing that in the meeting, it's like, what is the purpose of the meeting? Nobody is paying attention. I feel like that on some Zoom meetings, that's the way it is these days.
Right, exactly. Or there's just like a couple of people getting some value out of it. Everybody else are just passengers. But what I find as well is, if I stay present and I stick with it, eventually I'm sort of forced to try and shift the meeting in a productive direction, right? It forces me to make some kind of intervention, if I can, to actually have it give me some value. So
that is very true. I'm the same way. So if I am present and I try to be present in the meetings, if it's getting derailed, rather than checking out and like checking my email or something, I'll like interject something and try to get back on track. Yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose particularly for technical, because some of my background's in I started as a programmer, and so my background is technical. And I think it's true for all human beings, but especially for technical people, we've always got, there's this thing, right? I've got to, there's always some excuse you can say, I've got to get this out by this deadline, or I find I'm just being pinged on it. I find that you can sort of weave a story around how everybody's depending on you much more easily, and that gives you a reason not to show up to things or not be present to things.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
that helps with your ego, helps you feel important. So that does happen a lot. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I can't do this because I've got, I'm the only person who can solve this particular problem. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think that's perhaps a flaw, obviously, in technically minded personalities, is to try and create that world for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, like everybody, there's these 6 human needs, and most people crave significance and certainty. The top 2 most people have, and with highly technical people, they want to feel needed. They want to feel like they're smarter than everybody, and that their intellect is what is required, and they get the certainty because if they are needed and they feel like there's a demand for them at their work, then there's a certainty there as well.
Right. And of these 7 steps, Christian, which do you wrestle with the most?
I wrestle with 2, probably the most. One of them is acknowledgement. I believe in acknowledgement. You have to be able to acknowledge yourself before you can acknowledge others. And with cybersecurity and just in humans in general, we often have trouble acknowledging somebody else. So for me, I've done like a lot of Ironman triathlons. I've done a lot of things that are hard, but I've had trouble acknowledging myself, like saying that was a pretty cool thing I did or that was difficult. I tend to like always look forward to the next thing and say, okay, I did that, next thing. Never like take a moment and celebrate or acknowledge. I'm getting better. So like when my book hit like #1 bestseller, launch week, I took some downtime and celebrated. But part of me was like, you know what? I made #1 in my category. Now I want to make #1 in all of Amazon. So I'm going to try to make that happen. So it's like, it's a never-ending cycle.
That wasn't really an achievement.
Exactly. I tended to diminish it. So anyway, when I got better at acknowledging myself, I could get better at acknowledging other people, because everybody wants to be appreciated. And if you don't show appreciation, it's a frustrating scenario for other people. And then the other one is communication. This has been, it's always a challenge, like in relationships or anything, communication. We can always get better at it. And understanding like what our triggers are is extremely important in communication. And with me, this trigger has been coming up in the past, I don't know, throughout my whole life, but in the past like month, it's been sort of spotlighted. This trigger where if somebody asks me something, I'm assuming that they're asking me because I've done something wrong. So I automatically like get a little bit defensive. And sometimes they're not asking from that perspective, but something happened in my childhood or whatever, where I respond in that way, and it doesn't like help the scenario. So I'm working on that. There's always something to work on.
Right. And in terms of your teams, like, so that's you. What as a leader, like, where do you find it most important to, which of these steps do you find it most important to emphasize as a leader of others?
Yeah, I think as a leader, it's the awareness is a big part of it. Understanding that everybody has their own model of the world, and I struggle with this as well. I used to think, well, why can't everybody just be like me and do it this way, right? But not everybody's going to have the same view of things, and that's what a team is. If we're all the same, we're not going to have a very good team. So it's understanding like the unique view of the world that everyone brings to your collective team is what strengthens the team, actually. and being able to work with that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that hit me a little bit here, when you said that, because I've definitely fallen into that trap. I've been a big evangelist for sort of agile methods in management, and we've had a lot of sort of agile gurus on this show, which I guess you're familiar with, from your background.
Yeah.
I can often thought, just why can't you just see that this is better? Damn you! This is just a better way to work, and you're dumb if you can't see it. Like, so often I've fallen into that, and it's just such a counterproductive way of trying to persuade people or influence or communicate, because it just doubles their resistance to it, right?
That's right. That method doesn't work too well. Yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of I've studied NLP, neuro linguistic programming, and one of the presuppositions is the meaning of communication is a response you get. So if you're trying to tell somebody something and they're not getting it, that's your problem, and you're not communicating well enough. And if you understand the model of their world a little bit better, then it can shift your communication. This is the problem with cybersecurity as well. We tend to talk over people's heads, and people don't get it. But we have to be able to shift our communication because they need to get it. Otherwise, we're just getting frustrated the whole time.
Right.
Yeah,
that's such an important message. Like, it's not them who's not getting it; it's you're not able to communicate it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's taking ownership of the communication, which it can be frustrating, but it can also be a little bit liberating as well. Yeah,
right. And I can see why that's emerged in a book that's centered around technical leadership, because it's so easy for technical individuals to fall into that. How can you not understand it? Because in your technical bubble, everything seems so obvious, doesn't it?
It's easy to fall into that, but it's also been tolerated in cybersecurity. In the industry as a whole, it's been tolerated that, we're smart, the users are stupid, management's stupid, the board of directors stupid, our clients are stupid. This is like this mindset and paradigm that's like been tolerated in the industry. And it is part of the reason why we are where we are, and why, like we talked about earlier, there's all these data breaches. Because if we're so smart as an industry, cybersecurity professionals, the outcome we should be seeking is to make sure there's less data breaches, less of our clients, our own internal customers, less people are hacked into. So the smartness is not really, being intellectually smart is one thing, but not being able to like apply your total intelligence or life skills to help a scenario is another, and that's actually the more important thing.
Right. No, that makes sense. And it also links, I don't know if you come across Jocko Willink.
Yeah.
Right.
Read,
he's another.
Extreme Ownership, and I talked about that in my book a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of that. Yeah.
But it reminds me of that extreme ownership in communication, right? It talks to this point. Like, if they're not getting it, I need to own that. Total ownership, right? Upwards, downwards, sideways, in all aspects, including communication.
Yeah, that's right. And I think from one of the catalysts to write my book was, I was a founder and CEO of my business, and I believe in ownership. So if there's something wrong with the business, there's something wrong with me. I believe a business, we talked about a mirror a lot, right? I believe a business, if you're the owner of a business or the CEO, the business is a reflection of you. Right. So if the business is not doing well, or the systemic issues, then those are issues you are allowing to happen, and you need to resolve those internally so they can be, show up externally as well. So that mirror was always in front of me when I owned my business. And when you have the ownership, it makes you realize, like, it's not that employee's fault. It's my fault for hiring that employee or not training that person. So it's a different perspective.
Yeah. No, and it just reminds me of one of the coaches I work with. She's brilliant at this. CEOs will call her in and say, "Oh, look, this is wrong, and this person's not doing it," and then she'll just, and how is all of that a reflection of you, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's much easier to blame the outside world, though, but taking ownership is difficult. Yeah.
Right.
And that's a great book. Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Elif Babin is an awesome book. Yeah.
Right. And that goes to both ex-military as well.
Yeah.
Well, at least Jocko is. I don't know if.
No, they both were. Yeah, they're both ex-SEALs. Yeah.
Oh, both ex-SEALs. Okay. Mm-hmm. Double SEALs.
Yeah.
Yeah, got to be on your toes for a seminar with those two, eh? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, Christian. Thank you for being so open.
Yeah, no problem.
Is there anything, we've kind of missed, salient points from the book you'd like to share for people who might be more interested?
I think we hit the 7-step secure methodology. That's the main framework for the book. I didn't want the book to be theoretical. I wanted it to be applicable. So I have that 7-step methodology, and I have activities in there as well to try to tie the concepts together and allow people to integrate the concepts. And the book is focused around cybersecurity, but it's really a personal development book, but leveraging my experience in cybersecurity. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that this book would be, also, I think because the ideas were so familiar to me, having had a technical background, I think anybody with a technical background, a lot of this will resonate. And as you say, and of course, many of these concepts are just, broad reflections on the human condition. So.
Yeah. And the book is not, several people have told me they don't think they can understand the book. They make an assumption the book is filled with technical jargon, which is exactly what I'm talking is like a bad thing. So there's no technical jargon in the book at all. There's a couple things as an example of what not to do, because if nobody can understand what we're talking about because it's too technical, then that's defeating the point. So don't think the book is full of technical jargon. That's the other thing I want to, it's very easy to read and digest.
Yeah, absolutely. And packed with stories. Yes. So thank you. We'll put the links to the book and to Alpine Security in the descriptions to the show.
Okay. Awesome.
Thanks once again.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard. I appreciate it.
Thank you.